You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 107 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Now, I wasn't going to do a show today, but I decided to because, you know, over the last couple of years, I have been, I guess some people would say, an advocate for Russell Westbrook and the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, I think the way that the Thunder left Seattle was pretty disgusting, to be honest with you. But I do appreciate the intensity and the fearlessness that Russell Westbrook plays with. So I will watch more of his games and say someone like Damian Lillard, for lack of a better example, because obviously we're going to be talking about the Thunder and Blazers game. So people have accused me of being a fan of his, and on a personal level, they're right. I am a fan of his. But when it comes to the podcast and when it comes to analyzing him, I am unbiased because I'm self-aware enough to recognize what his flaws are. Now, that being said, I've taken quite a bit of heat for some of the stuff I have said for Oklahoma. And as I said, you know, some of it's warranted. I mean, last year, heading into last season, I said that I actually picked that Oklahoma would win the NBA championship. And a lot of people wrote that off as me just being a homer towards Russell Westbrook. And once again, that's not the case. And we're starting to see the emergence of how good this Thunder team can be despite Russell Westbrook's play. And we're really seeing the ascension of the Thunder. And in the last episode I talked about how Billy Donovan deserves a lot of credit for this. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll break that down because I got a few responses with that as to whether or not he should be considered for Coach of the Year. Absolutely he should be considered for Coach of the Year. But obviously, I want to begin by talking about last night's game. And what we saw was the Blazers, who were the 4th seed, up against the 3rd seed in the Thunder. It was in Oklahoma. And we saw a continuation, really, of what we saw on the weekend between the Thunder and the Rockets. And that was Westbrook playing bad, shooting terribly, turning the ball over too, and Paul George carrying the slack and the rest of the role players really stepping up. And that's important to note, because there's a few things I want to tackle here. First of all, Paul George. And I may have to rewrite this thing or reevaluate this thing at some point, but as of right now, I said it was always a 2-horse race for MVP honors this year, between Harden and Giannis. We now have the 3rd horse. There is no question Paul George is in that category. There's everybody else. Paul George, and you got to look beyond the numbers in this, because Paul George does not dominate the basketball. He does not hurt his team at all. He plays on both ends. He's unselfish. Watch him work off the ball as well. He doesn't need the ball in his hands, and a lot of times he'll defer to Westbrook and allow him to to organize the offense and initiate the offense. And when he works off the ball, you'll see him setting screens for the guys like Steven Adams. You'll see him making back cuts. You'll see him do these things. You'll see him crash the offensive boards and tip it to teammates. You will see these little things. Those little things add up. And I'm going to be honest with you. I have, before he went to Oklahoma, of course I knew who Paul George was. I had watched him extensively. We all saw that injury in Team USA. We saw him come back later that season for short periods of time. We saw him return. But I had no idea he was this good off the ball. I really didn't. I knew he was not a ball-dominant player, and that's why I wanted to see him team up with Russell Westbrook, because Westbrook needed the ball in his hands. Paul George didn't need the ball in his hands to be effective. It's a perfect complement and a perfect duo. And quite honestly, they are the best duo in basketball right now, even with Westbrook playing as bad as he is shooting the ball. It's not even close. I mean, who else are you going to say? Embiid and Simmons? If you're going to go with that combination, well, Simmons can't shoot the ball either. And I guess, of course, you got to throw in Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. But, I mean, that's kind of boring. They're right there with them, though. They are right there with them. Paul George is playing that good. If Westbrook ever finds his jump shot and finds his legs again, that duo is better. But I guess, yeah, you're right. We'll go with Durant and Steph Curry over them for now. But come playoff time, Because keep in mind, Durant's a good defender, a very good defender, as is Paul George. Steph Curry's not that good of a defender, especially isolated. Russell Westbrook is a far superior defender. So we're talking about completeness here. I'm tempted to go with Oklahoma if they are to match up in the NBA playoffs. But getting back to Paul George, and we can't give this guy enough credit. We really can't. And for all the drama that we have seen infect the NBA, this guy's really drama-free. The biggest drama that he caused was by just creating no drama and re-signing with his team. Laker fans, I get it, you're upset. He said that he was interested in you, but guess what? It changed. If you're going to blame anyone, blame Magic Johnson for not trading Ingram and the number 2 pick. That's who you have to trade for. That's who you have to blame for. Because had the Lakers moved on Paul George when he was available. Now, that being said, we don't know, because we saw with the Pelicans. We saw how the Pelicans just refused to want to deal with the Lakers because they felt that tampering was in play and Paul George was trying to force his way to LA. So out of spite, they said no. So we don't know if that was in play with Indiana or not. But if it wasn't in play with Indiana, then it's completely on Magic. It's completely on the Lakers. Because they didn't pull the trigger. They got too cocky. They thought, we'll be able to sign him anyway, so why unload these assets? It doesn't work. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we saw such a desperate bid from the Lakers to try to bring Anthony Davis in, because they didn't want to see a repeat of that happening. Say if Anthony Davis gets traded to Boston, he may fall in love with that city. I mean, who would have ever thought a kid from California, two kids from California, Westbrook as well, would fall in love with Oklahoma? I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about Oklahoma, but that's a very different environment than Los Angeles. But getting back to Paul George, he's drama-free. He's, and even when it comes to just pure basketball, I remember Donovan saying that Billy Donovan wants to draw up plays from him, and Paul George doesn't want it. He just wants the offense to flow to him. This is why this team is successful. This is why their role players are playing at such a high level. It's because of Paul George's... this team has taken on the identity, really, of Paul George, not Russell Westbrook. And that I did not see coming. I thought Russell Westbrook was... Pippen was... not Pippen. Paul George was going to essentially play the Pippen role. And I don't mean playing defense, although he is playing defense at a very high level, just not at a Scottie Pippen level. But I thought the team's identity would still be based around Russell Westbrook, just like the Bulls' identity remained around Michael Jordan's. But the identity of this team, especially on offense, and defense too, really, has gone around the mentality of Paul George. He deserves all the credit here. All the credit. And even though I'm just ad-libbing here, I did pull up some numbers. So last night's game, obviously, everyone's going to be talking about Paul George. Another close to 50-point performance, shooting the ball at a very high percentage, 15 of 26, 8 of 13 from three-point territory, 12 rebounds, 10 assists. Incredible stat line. You'll be hard-pressed. And this is up against a contender, by the way. And I'm not talking about what they did last year, because that was a little bit overstated, finishing third in the West last year, because they're only 2 games ahead of ninth, if you can believe that. But what I will say is this season, they are fourth. And, for all the things that I've got them right, equally I have got them wrong. And I said Portland was... I'd be surprised if Portland would finish in the top 4. They are currently fourth. So I don't know if that's an indication of how... it's essentially a one-horse race at the top. I mean, Denver's been a surprise, and I mean, no one picked that. But in terms of, usually the West is a lot more top heavy. You get the logjam of about 4 or 5 teams. You usually get one team separating themselves, like Houston last year or Golden State in the previous years, and then you get 4 or 5 teams that are within, arm's length of each other, and then you get another logjam. This year, not so much. But getting back to the numbers, and I wanted to point out Westbrook. Now, as I said, I do really like watching him play. I love the intensity. 21 points, 14 rebounds, 11 assists. That's the good news. The bad news: 5 of 19 from the field, 1 of 6 from three-point territory. He did shoot well from the foul line, 10 of 13, because he's not shooting well this year at the foul line. and 6 turnovers. Not good. Not good at all. And the fact that this team is winning despite that is alarming. I mean, they've won 9 of their last 10. That's very nearly a 10-game winning streak, because the one loss they had was on Super Bowl Sunday up against Boston. And that came down to the wire. So over the 10-game stretch, Russell Westbrook has averaged 19.6 points per game, shooting the ball under 40% from the field, and 26% from three-point territory, and 67% from the foul line. He has also accumulated nearly 5 turnovers per game, 4.8. Once again, the fact they are winning, despite this lack of production from Westbrook, he's almost hurting them. That's insane. And for everyone talking about Golden State being untouchable and maybe Philly's now the team that's emerging as their biggest threat, my oh my, just look at what's happening in Oklahoma. Keep an eye on this team, because once Westbrook either figure out to slow down and not take as many shots because he's not shooting the ball well, or he gets his legs underneath him and starts knocking down shots, this team is going to soar. Because it's not just the duo here. As I mentioned in the podcast yesterday, you have fantastic coaching in Donovan, but the role players, Steven Adams, borderline all-star, Ferguson, who knows what his ceiling is? Grant, who knows what his ceiling is? This team is not to be messed with. You cannot overlook how good this team is playing. And you got other players stepping up. I mean, Patterson didn't play well last night, but he gives you good minutes and he plays defense. He had 7 rebounds. Noel isn't playing bad. He will protect the rim for you. This team has, and I haven't even mentioned Schroeder, who didn't play yet last night. This team has enough depth in there to worry anybody, and that includes the Warriors. I know I was premature in what I was saying last year, but what I was saying last year, I should probably explain that to anybody that's started to listen to the podcast and think, wow, really? You selected the Thunder to win? You're damn right I did. And the reason I did was simple. As I said before, I thought Paul George and Westbrook were a perfect fit. You have a dominant guy on offense who needs the ball in his hands, but you have a guy who can still be effective without touching the ball as much. Beyond that, they brought in Carmelo Anthony for really nothing. And up until that point, I was convinced that Carmelo would be humble enough to accept a role that would actually help the team. And I was one of the first ones to say, hey, he should be coming off the bench. Now, he laughed at that, and he thought, there's no way that's ever going to happen. Turns out, I was right, and everyone else that was calling for that was 100% right. They should have been looking to develop some of the younger guys and have Melo come off the bench, and stagnate those minutes so he could be the leader of that second unit, the same way Schroeder has. That's the mentality I was looking at. Now, to Carmelo's credit, he wasn't a complete detriment to that team. He did try his best to fit in with that ball club. He just didn't get the touches. But that's what happens when you're when you have imbalance like that, and you've got all your stars playing, all your scorers playing in the starting lineup, and you have pretty much nothing coming in off the bench. So he should have been smart enough to see that. But that's the reason I was looking at it. And, I did think that the Warriors were vulnerable. And I said, actually, prior to it, I said, I doubt that the Warriors will win the championship. Of course, they proved me wrong with that. But it will come down to, and their biggest threats will be either Houston or Oklahoma. Now, I was way off, obviously, with Oklahoma. I was 100% right with Houston. And I stand by this to this day, that if Chris Paul was healthy, they would have won. They were up 3-2 in the conference finals before Chris Paul got injured. Now, whether they would have finished the job off and completed that series win, I don't know. I'm not going to say it for sure, but I believe they would have, but nobody knows for sure. Who knows what would have happened? But I'll tell you what, they would have had a much better chance with Chris Paul than without Chris Paul. And we saw them let 2 big leads get away, 2 double-digit leads get away from them. And I'm of the mindset that had they had Chris Paul to manage that game, to control the pace of that game in either of those games, they would have walked away with the victory. So for all the things I've gotten right, I have gotten plenty wrong, and vice versa. So that's just me explaining myself. I don't know why. But when you look at what we're seeing with Oklahoma this year, the depth is there, all the pieces, all the ingredients are there. Now, what I want to see out of Russell Westbrook going forward, obviously, if he can start scoring the ball, fantastic, but he needs to recognize that he can do other things to really help his team. And I'm talking about offensive rebounding. I would love to see him crash the glass for two reasons. One, he's a fantastic rebounder. We've seen him on the defensive end. And don't you dare tell me that that's stat padding. Because what that actually allows Oklahoma to do, they don't have to throw an outlet pass to Westbrook to get the ball moving after a missed shot. What it allows him to do, and this is such basic basketball, is he's able to get that ball and he's already turning as he's got on the rebound most times and looking up the court. That puts incredible pressure on a defense. Now, what it also does is if the defense does get back, no harm done. You can just slow it down and run your half-court offense. There is virtually no risk associated with it. That being said, as a rebounder, because he is so strong, because he is so athletic, he's going up against other point guards. And yeah, other point guards aren't slouches either, but they're not Westbrook. Westbrook may be the most athletic point guard in the history of basketball. Derrick Rose, before he got injured, is up there. Steve Francis is up there, obviously, as well. Baron Davis is up there. You can make an argument for Penny Hardaway, especially when you consider his size. But when you combine strength, speed, explosiveness, from a purely an athletic standpoint, Westbrook is there. Now, on top of all of that, he has a nose for the basketball. And he is fearless. He's not afraid to throw some bodies around. It doesn't bother him. So, I would like to see him crash the glass a little bit more, not just to put pressure on teams to have to box out, and that slows them up. They can't leak out in those situations. But also, off made shots, he can pressure the ball off inbound passes. I made a post on, I don't know when it was. It was maybe 2 months ago. And it was a picture of James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant when they were still in Oklahoma. And I said, how many titles would this team have won had they all stayed together? And some people said 5 or 6. I think that's a little bit generous. But the majority of the responses that I got, I shouldn't say the majority, but the most popular response that I got was, we don't know how Westbrook would have actually helped either of those guys develop. Basically, he's going to get his stats. The other guys are going to be left out of the cold in Durant and Harden. What we are seeing now with Westbrook is a contrast to that, and hopefully a change in perception. Because what we are seeing now is this team winning, even though his production isn't that great. Yeah, across the board, his numbers are good, but he's still playing a little bit out of control. He just needs to slow it up a little bit. And I would love to see him do it, because he can get his team into trouble at times. But as I said before, the fact that they are winning despite or in spite of what his production is, that's a testament to this team. And everybody needs to pay attention to this team. All the hype around Philadelphia, and deservedly so with Philly, because of the pieces they've added. All the hype around Milwaukee. All the hype around Toronto, adding Gasol. Look, quite honestly, and I've been guilty of this too, I've said the biggest threats to Golden State this year are probably going to be in the Eastern Conference. With those teams. I didn't even mention Boston. But we've all got to reevaluate that and really start to take into account what Oklahoma is doing. And they are not peaking just yet. That's the important thing to note. Even though they've won 9 of their last 10, even though they're winning these ball games, we have not seen their peak. Because as I said before, Westbrook is playing pretty bad. So once he starts to emerge, then it's going to be scary for the rest of the NBA. Anyway, guys, I just wanted to get that out there. I wanted to do this episode. We've got some good games tonight, actually. Speaking of Boston and Philly, that's the game of the night. Obviously, you've got to tune into that if you're an NBA fan. I don't know if Kyrie Irving is playing or not, and is it bad that I don't even really care if Kyrie Irving's playing or not? Because the ball moves a lot better. I know Kyrie Irving is averaging a career high in assists. That means nothing to me. The assist number is maybe the most overrated statistic in all of basketball. I want to see good ball movement. the ball flows a lot better with Terry Rozier on the court. Now, this matchup to me is interesting because Boston seems to be a little bit of a tailspin. You know, especially after their loss to the Clippers of all teams at home, after they unloaded their best players. Doc Rivers, once again, I said Coach of the Year for Billy Donovan. Doc Rivers, my goodness, if he gets this team to the playoffs, and just hand him the award, he probably should have received a lot more consideration for it last year too. What an excellent coaching performance he has done over the last few years. But that's a topic for another day. Boston seems to be in a bit of a tailspin. Philly looks like they've surpassed them, and everybody's looking at the records for Toronto and Milwaukee, and rightly so, because those are great records. But the best lineup in the Eastern Conference, a lot of people, it's almost become a consensus that it's Philadelphia. And it would be hard to argue against that, even if the pieces in Boston were falling into place for them. Because, yeah, we get it. They're not meshing. Kyrie Irving is not meshing with the younger players. Tatum is not developing, or Jaylen Brown. But best case scenario, had they continued on that trajectory that they were on last year, and you add Kyrie Irving and he was just an addition, there was no subtraction to any of the other players in terms of their production, I think you could still make an argument that Philly has a better starting lineup. Now, in terms of coaching and depth, that's another thing. But isn't it really exciting? And I said this in last year's playoffs. It's so exciting for this rivalry, these games, Philly and Boston, to mean so much again. I love it when they mean something, because that's one of the most underrated, great rivalries in all of sports. You know, we talk about Russell versus Chamberlain, we instantly think about the Lakers and the Celtics. But Russell versus Chamberlain, the heart of that was really the Celtics versus the 76ers. Anyway, prediction time. I will go with... You know what? I'm going to go with Boston in an upset. I'm not going to put money on it because I think that'd be crazy. And the other game to watch out for is obviously Utah versus Golden State. That will also be a good game. And I will go with Golden State in that game. I'll be watching that pretty much to see how Donovan Mitchell plays. And I always like to see how, you know, if you do pay attention to this game, watch how Rudy Gobert controls the defense. And how much better they communicate and how much better they pressure the ball on the perimeter when he's on the court as opposed to off the court. And then you will see why that's such a glaring weakness with the Boston Celtics, because they don't have anyone like that. If they had somebody like that with the perimeter players that they have, can you imagine the defensive intensity we'd see on the perimeter for Boston? Anyway, guys, this was a bit of an impromptu episode. Virtually no, there was no research done, so please don't kick my ass too badly if there was any mistakes with the statistics or the records or anything like that. I hope you have a great day. Enjoy the games. And later on this week, we'll have some more episodes for you.